Well, thank you everyone for being here. My name is Laura Van Zant, and I write the blog One Girl, Two Cities. So we are, as the Twin Cities theater bloggers, are hosting these conversations every month, at least for now, about just different aspects of our theater community. It was kind of prompted by some of the conversations that happened around the Guthrie's the moving company's Refugio show, and then also the talks that Alma had with West Side Story at the Ordway. And so we've just been picking different topics each month to try and cover and inviting different panelists, and we've been really enjoying the conversations so far. So I was hoping, let's start with maybe the other bloggers that are in the room. If you could stand up and introduce yourselves as well.
Go ahead. I'm Kit Bix.
I'm Carol Jackson, and I write for Minnesota Theater Love, as does my sister.
Julie Jackson, Minnesota Theater Love.
I'm Gina Musto. I write for The Room Where It Happens.
And I'm Laura Coleman. I write for Twin City Stages.
So we are always open to topics and suggestions for these conversations. You can, there's a box over here where you can write those down and put them in there, or you can message us at any time. There's also slips of paper that have all of our information on them in case you want to get a hold of us. We just also want to thank Park Square Theater for welcoming us here tonight. They are just donating their space and their time, which is really appreciated, of course. And then also, thank you to the panelists for being here tonight. So this month, what we are covering is artists with disabilities, and then like ableism and accessibility in the theater community. You know, all these topics that we're picking, our bubbles, we feel like are all very small, and so we're trying to pick for now, broad topics and just kind of absorbing it, because we all have a lot to learn as well, and just kind of giving people the space to share their experience and their message with us. So if we could just go down the line, and I'll have you all introduce yourselves, and then just kind of give us basically your background in the theater community and anything else you might want to share.
My name is Jeanne Calvit. I'm the artistic director and founder of Interact Center for the Visual and Performing Arts, and we have a professional theater. I've been doing theater with people with and without disabilities for 38 years.
I'm Stacey Dinner-Levin. I'm a parent of 4 boys. My eldest, Jordy, sitting over there, has autism. I come from a family of actors, and Jordy has performed in inclusive theater since he was very young, and several years back I wrote a play about him called Autistic License that was first produced at the Illusion, and my husband played Jordy in the show. Years later, Jordy ended up playing Jordy in the show, which was something completely unintended, and I have sat on I was one of the founding members of the Mixed Blood that created the Radical Hospitality program that they have there now to be inclusive to people with disabilities.
My name is Cassandra Snow. I run Gadfly Theater Productions, which is a queer and feminist theater company here in town, and then I also do arts writing and reviews for an online LGBT plus newspaper called The Column. I have lots of directing and theater experience. My background in accessibility is mostly in living it. I have invisible disability and illness that affects literally every single thing that I do. The most notable being severe rheumatoid arthritis. And so that is why I'm here, I guess. Yeah.
Hello everyone, I'm Shawn, Vriezen for lesson. He's a deaf actor. He's been involved in many different roles. He was an ASL consultant he's a certified deaf interpreter for theater as well.
Good, thank you. So this is meant to be a conversation. The bloggers and I have formulated questions for the panelists. You are all welcome to jump in at any time. Just raise your hand and I'll call on you. And then as you ask your question, if you could just state your name, and then if you're comfortable just kind of saying what kind of affiliation you have, you know, if you're associated with the theater or you know, an artist or anything like that, just so we kind of have an idea of who's here. But If you don't feel comfortable, you don't have to. So I guess as I was reading up on some articles that we've all shared about artists with disabilities, I read that 20% of the population is comprised of people that have disabilities, but it seems like, and part of the reason that we're having this conversation is that it's still such a small part of our theater scene here. And so I'm curious, with your experience, what your thoughts are just on the general state of artists with disabilities, or even just accessibility in general in the theater scene here right now. Whoever wants to go first.
Go ahead.
Well, I have to say, and it hasn't progressed a lot since I've been working in this field. I think that I've been to probably 30 conferences on accessibility, and I would say 90% of the discussion is about ramps and ASL, and I think the whole definition of accessibility we need to look at that, because very often it's just like, as I said, concrete things, and it's, as we all know, disability is the largest marginalized, or however you want to put it, group in the world, not only in the United States, and yet it's almost always left out of discussions of diversity. And it cuts across all races, all socioeconomic, it's what my interest is when I talk about accessibility beyond the ramps and the ASL, that's all important, is actors and artists with disabilities having access to the creative process, to be at the table as creators and theater makers, not just as passive, watching theater, but is actually participating in the creative process. So that's my interest in expanding kind of the meaning of accessibility in the arts for people with disabilities.
So to build on that there's definitely very few theaters that would be fully accessible, but when we think about accessibility, as you're talking about ramps and bathrooms that are accessible and having captioning or ASL, it really is so much bigger than that, because individuals with disabilities are often on a fixed income. So being able to afford a theater ticket is a huge thing. Transportation is a major obstacle to get to the theater and to get home from the theater, especially when you're talking about evening performances and when people want to go, and things like metro mobility are wholly inadequate, especially if they're telling you that there's a half-hour, grace period. So that may mean that a person with a disability is going to have to arrive a half-hour late to a show. They may be sitting in a dark lobby a half-hour after a show, which is just unacceptable. So these are things that most of us these are the thoughts that we don't entertain at all. Another concern is subject matter of what theaters choose to put, as part of their season. So for people with certain cognitive disabilities, they may want something that may not be something that a lot of theaters would entertain doing. So it may be more musical theater or stuff of lighter fare. Maybe yes, maybe no, but there's kind of a diversity of what individuals with disabilities prefer to see. And then of course there's the whole thing about having actual performers who have an opportunity to have roles in the theater as well. So it's kind of a massive, there's a whole lot of issues that go beyond accessible bathrooms and ramps, you know?
For the people that watch the show.
Right,
It's
right.
basically when people think of that, it's like for people that want to come to see the shows. Yeah.
I think from my end, what I've noticed as both audience and a creator, and I've made this mistake too, is rarely is there an instance where I feel like a show or a venue or something isn't accessible to me, and I raise that concern to someone. Rarely do they just shoot me down like, oh, that's not an issue, whatever. It's usually met really well. I don't really feel like that onus should be on me, and then I think about how many people aren't speaking up, how many people don't have the energy that day, or even maybe have been shot down elsewhere and don't think that that's something they should do. And on top of that, it is exhausting to have to just be the person that is always like doing that. And then, so I think that is a big issue, is how do we look for sort of what's gonna make things easier or more accessible up front. And a lot of times it's stuff you might not even think about. I just had an experience that has been fixed because this company was great, but with a show with a lot of audience participation that, because of the nature of it, was actually really kind of impossible for me to fully enjoy by the end. And I think stuff like that is really common, and just trying to think about that ahead of time. I think part of the reason it is so difficult for artists, I think there's a lot of levels. I think the companies that really care, that really want to do better, that would do better, and again, I can speak to this as well, but is sometimes the finances to fix the things that are wrong aren't trickling down to our smallest houses in town, even though they really are the ones that care the most and want to do the most to fix it. There is just the problem of not knowing. I think the other thing that people don't take into account with artists specifically, though, is someone who is disabled in any way probably doesn't have the same amount of energy to kind of go through a rehearsal process or something like that. And so one thing that I always try to do is schedule much more rehearsal time than I need. So if someone needs a mental health day or needs, there are literally days I can't get out of my apartment because of my arthritis. So if someone else needs that, I want to make sure that they're not then kind of having that guilt pushed on them that like, oh, this wrecks the whole show because we have plenty of time. And so I think more things like that would really help more artists be involved. I think right now a lot of artists with disabilities or even with chronic illness aren't getting involved because they're like, well, even if they make every, concession that I need, I'm still not going to be able to do this for 15 hours a week or more. But I think even that there are workarounds that could be utilized.
For him, he has a few roles. Because he's been going to theaters for a long time. Acting, checking on the interpreters, make sure they're doing what they need to do. So it's accessibility. It is pretty expensive. It's not cheap. Because they have to hire them for each show and make sure they have the right one. The building ramps, they put it down one time and done. It's one-time cost. I mean, it is pretty expensive. Also, sometimes if they have the show itself has an interpreter, there's limited dates. So he can't just go into any show that matches his time. It has to be when the interpreter's there. So if there's an interruption in a schedule, he can't watch that show. For acting, it's the same concept. As an interpreter, it's not cheap. There's a lot of negotiation, see if they can, part it out or, A lot of times interpreters have to give up their pay. They have to lower their rate to provide accessibility for him. So it's a challenge for the interpreter themselves. They specifically have to pay for everything, and he has to pay his bills. So yes, it's true, the theater's still running, so can't do anything about that. So if the theater's broke, it's not much about that. A lot of times he's not mentioned that he's deaf. If they do mention that he's deaf, they'll do specific interviews and they audition people who are not deaf themselves, or they put a hearing person in as a deaf person. Because there's a lot of roles that pop up. And then it's competition with other people. But his accessibility is limited.
Could you speak up a little louder, please?
Yes, sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. And for the working interpreter, you know, they tend to, they'll put the hearing interpreter in, but the deaf interpreter themselves is pretty new to work with the deaf interpreter. So having two interpreters, it's double the pay, and it makes it pretty complicated. But the value of having a CDI, you know, it brings the production value up that much more. If you're watching TV in black and white, and now you're seeing it in HD, using a certified deaf interpreter.
I can tell you a little bit of what Mixed Blood did to try and address some of these issues. So if you're familiar at all with what Mixed Blood has a program now that they call Radical Hospitality, which means all their shows are free. He didn't want to do just sort of a pay what you can night. His theater is now completely free to anybody who wants to go. And I can't tell you all the logistics of how he did that, except that I think that he talked to the New York Shakespeare Company, the ones that perform Shakespeare in Central Park, and how they go about doing it, because obviously people just come up in the park and watch Shakespeare. So he found out how they did it. He still has his people who are members, yearly members, that do pay, and they get priority seating. But otherwise, it's first come, first serve, and I know that he looks for grants and people to give donations, but otherwise, every single performance at the Mixed Blood Theater is now free. So that's how he addressed the cost issue. The other thing that he did is that if you call the theater and you identify yourself as somebody is having a disability, he will send a cab to you, to and for, and will pay for that cab. The theater pays for that service, so you do not have to deal with Metro Mobility. And that allows you to take children or anyone else that were being on a bus or anything could be a really stressful situation. So those are two things that he did. And another thing that he did, and he has that historic firehouse building, but he managed to get a capital campaign and get that beast of a space that didn't have a decent lobby, that didn't have a decent bathroom, that had no place to sit down. I mean, you're talking about somebody with arthritis or any other issue waiting to get into a show, and to get that opened up wide, to put in seating and benches in the lobby, and he had an elevator put into the building, and now upstairs there's 3 or 4 stunning handicapped accessible unisex bathrooms. He has captioning at all of his shows so that you can read the captions, and I do know that he uses ASL, but I'm not sure if that's done for every performance. I'm not sure, it may be, but the captioning is always for every performance. So that is somebody who really did it, you know. In the meantime, he looks for shows to do that address disability, and he works to cast individuals with disabilities in those performances. I'm not going to say it's perfect, but that's, you know, if you're curious as to if it can be done or how it can be done, these were some steps that were taken.
I just want to say that we did a collaboration with Mixed Blood back in, oh God, I can't remember when it was, The Boys Next Door. It was probably 15 years ago, and Jack had the courage to, it had never been done. It's a story about 4 people with developmental disabilities living in a group home. And it had been done all over, even on TV. I think Mickey Rooney was in it. And it had never been done with actual actors with developmental disabilities. So we collaborated on that, and we had our actors in the show, and he not only so there were a lot, I mean, I think there were 6 or 7 of our actors with developmental and other disabilities were in the show. And it was after that, I think, when he saw, we did have to build in some extra rehearsals, but we didn't have any really other accommodations for people. They did the normal rehearsal schedule and all that. I think it was helpful that they worked at Interact, so they were used to having long hours in tech and all that, so they were fine with it. But it was after that that experience of having put that show on that Jack said to me, well, now I want to include people with disabilities in our show. So that was, I think that we've also done that at the History Theater, and it was similar with Ron Palusa. After that, he said, you know, because we did a co-production together with actors with disabilities, and I was there as kind of a support person too, and I was there in the audience, and Warren Bowles directed, but I would somehow give him some tips, because maybe, you know, saying stage left, 2-step stage right, blah, blah, didn't always work with some of our guys, so I'd say just jump up on the stage and tell them where you want to go. But they made all the accommodations, and it was really, it was fabulous.
Yeah, I just wanted to point it out because it sounds so daunting and impossible, and we did it in a couple of years. So
you just made the decision,
and not everybody necessarily has to go that far, but you know, some of these, taking on some of these steps can really make a huge difference, even if it does end up being a pay-what-you-can night or a pay-what-you-can week, or, you know, there's ways to sort of, you know, take parts of that and make it work. I truly believe that there's always a way to make this work, and that it'd be an extraordinarily rewarding kind of experience. You now see Broadway doing what they call sensory-friendly performances. They actually brought one. They did The Lion King here, and they did it here at the Orpheum, and I actually took Joy to see that. Now, he didn't necessarily need a sensory-friendly. He's awesome in those lights, but the tickets were available, and when you talk about cost, that was part of it too. So we got to take him to that, and that was a really amazing thing to watch and be a part of, even though he could go to a regular performance, because we were suddenly in an audience full of people where people were allowed to make vocalizations during the show. They were allowed to get up, and you didn't have to be, as a care provider, filled with anxiety that your child might be doing something inappropriate and are disrupting the show, or going to be shushed or whatever, that it was a way to just be and enjoy theater. And that's another piece, and we did discuss that with Jack, about helping audiences, changing the culture of audiences so that if people are making vocalizations during a show, so what? You know, and that's just part of, you know, how we need to change the way we think about being in public with different kinds of people too in society. But that sensory friendly gives families a safe place to be themselves, which is a beautiful thing.
I wanted to touch on something else Jeanne said too that I thought was great, which was so much of when we think about accessibility for artists is like, you just change how you communicate. That's really not difficult at all. We are inclusive when we cast about ability at Gadfly. We also, because we are a queer and feminist company, we invite a lot of people who don't have a lot of experience in theater, and so a lot of them don't know stage right or stage left or specific blocking or theater terms. to be inclusive to artists, it's really just a matter of saying different words a lot of times.
Or showing.
Yeah.
Just showing and giving examples.
And so everyone can start at least at those base levels of like, oh, well, I don't have to communicate the way they told me to in grad school. I can use different language. I think that was really valuable.
I feel like, we've touched on a couple, there's kind of two different areas to this conversation, you know, as far as audience accessibility and then artist accessibility, right? So I'm curious as far as what resources are available, because this is definitely like a topic that I just don't have that much information on.
Well, we've gotten funding from Minnesota State Arts Board and also for subsidizing tickets. So we have, our tickets are $5 plus they can bring a companion. And then we reimburse them for their transportation. And so that's one way that we, accommodate people with disabilities. I mean, audience members with disabilities.
Sure.
By doing. Another problem, another challenge, I should say, is marketing to people with, when we talk about disability, they're more diverse within the disability community. There's like hundreds of types of different disabilities and combinations, and some disabilities don't really have much in common. And so it's really, you can't just market in one way. You can't just like, well, we're gonna look at all the disability orgs and send word out, or we're gonna put it in the newspaper. I mean, you've got to kind of do lots of levels of outreach. Because if people live in group homes, they're not the decision makers if they can go to a show. So you have to, how do you reach those people? So you do a lot of guerrilla kind of going places and talking to people and handing out things, and also put it in the disability newsletters, as well as all the other so-called normal marketing that people do. So that's a whole other thing too, that you have to take into it. But we've also gotten funding for that, so,
I think resources are tricky sometimes, especially for smaller houses, like I mentioned. For a lot of those bigger grants we are talking about, you have to have already been operating at a certain income or budget level for usually a few years. And so you can't just write a grant that says, oh, well, I've already been operating at $20,000 a year if you can't prove that. And so when you've been squeaking by on $3,000 a show, you're not going to get those grants. No matter how well written it is, no matter how good your plan is, no matter how good your system is. And I really don't think there is a solution to that other than as a society just putting more support into those smaller houses, or putting enough support into arts funding that still sort of gets down that way. I think that is one of the biggest barriers for most companies when it comes to inclusivity or ability inclusivity specifically is we can't get those grants. It just isn't going to happen. And there are still some good ones. There are, we still apply for and sometimes get the ones that will cover ASL interpreters or captioning or stuff like that for a night, so that we don't have to worry about their loss of income or something like that. And those are smaller ones, but that's really all there is, unfortunately, for those smaller organizations.
Okay. To shift gears a little bit, I'm kind of, there's that term out there, cripping up. And as far as someone who is an artist that doesn't have a certain ability, but there's a character that does, and them as a performer playing that role because it's not necessarily, I'm curious your thoughts on that. So if someone, if there's a deaf character, should that be played by a deaf person? Or is it okay, quote unquote, for someone who isn't, if they're able to perform that role?
I mean, I unequivocally think those roles should be cast like appropriately. Like, I think a deaf person should play a deaf person. There's no other area of my activism or advocacy or my life where I would think that that was okay otherwise. So I certainly wouldn't draw the line
There's
there.
the old adage, nothing about us without us.
Yeah.
And I would tend to agree. I mean, I guess in certain situations there may be but yes, I think generally we want to cast people. There's plenty of talented, gifted actors out there with a variety of disabilities that should be working and can be working, and
Of all the specific sort of like types or, different kinds of marginalized people I have had to cast in 8 years, I think there was one show we ended up deciding we couldn't do because we couldn't find the cast. So someone on our budget only had one show that we had to say, well, maybe we can't do that. I really don't think there's any excuse for anyone, especially with a larger budget, to not be able to find someone who is probably just as talented, who maybe just doesn't have the experience, but again, that's just a different style of working with or communicating
Once
with
again,
them.
it might be difficult. You don't just put it in the normal places that you put for
Yes.
auditions.
That's a really good point.
It's kind of like
Yeah.
the marketing. You have to people call Interact a lot because you have an actor that,
Sure.
but and I happen to know a lot of really good actors that we've worked with and just that are great, that can totally do a professional job. But you can't just like put it in the normal audition and say, oh, well, we didn't get anybody,
Yeah.
So we'll have to get somebody. I think there's so much pressure in theater. I totally get it. I've been doing theater all my life, but you're on these small budgets. You have to throw a show up in 4 weeks, and so it is an additional big step to take.
Yeah, I guess for Shawn, I'm curious, like how you find roles, because obviously you're not going to only play characters who happen to be deaf too, and but maybe you have before, how you choose what roles you audition for and what that ends up being.
So most of his roles that he's found, it's word of mouth. Oh, they're looking for a deaf guy? Okay, yeah, contact me. And then if there's anything that hinders that, he can find somebody for them. There's the ugly duckling, or something like that. Or the deaf duck. They asked him to do it, but he had a complication. Because he was going to Turkey. He was working several months there as a videographer. So he couldn't do it. So he sent a bunch of different names to this person who was casting. And so they contacted pretty much all of those people. So that all went smooth. So they couldn't find anybody in the state. So oftentimes they have to fly other people into the state. Just the Clybourne Park at the Gadfly a few years ago. He worked there as an ASL consultant. It was all ran by hearing people. So that play itself was a special situation. So there's Act 1, Act 2. So Act 1, it was a perfect show. It was based in Chicago, the 1950s. And then Act 2 was like 20 or 30 years later. So it was the same actors, but they played as a different character. But the woman who was deaf was a deaf, pregnant woman. The second act, she was still pregnant. But the actor had a daughter, or the character had a daughter, so she was growing up. So the mother's deaf. So now she's pregnant with another daughter, but they look exactly the same. So that role, it's always acted by a hearing person or a deaf person who can speak. So that was the challenge. So they did the interview, and they tried many different things. So who they took for the role, one person was an interpreter. She has a theater background. She grew up in theater, very skilled signer. there's another person who was in the interpreter program but hasn't finished the program. She could still sign, but they ended up picking the one who wasn't a very skilled signer, but they picked someone who could sign but was here. So the audience from the beginning so when they picked the person for the cast, they planned to hire an ASL consultant. So they contacted another ASL interpreter who has a major in theater. They asked them, they said, nope, it needs to be a 100% deaf person. I'm not doing that. So a lot of times the theaters will go to a hearing person who knows sign. Often they'll take the role, but they live out the opinion for the deaf people, even though everything's included. And the interpreter was good, so just let them know next time you can contact me and I'll go for it. So I showed up, he went in, he know a little bit about the script, he read it of course, but he hasn't met it, went in and met the actors and stuff. So they said, what year is it now? What's your background? Or how many years have you done it? What's your background? Are you mainstream? Are you a deaf family? Are you a oralist? So deaf is not one size fits all. So there's so many different, it varies a lot. So it's based on the era. So 1950 signs are a lot different than signs now. It's like we don't speak the same now as we did back in those days. It's the same concept. So he was the consultant, the ASL consultant. So for one example, for a show that he was on, there's a stage going up. So he went up the stairs on the side of the stage. There's a big chest up there. It opened up. Tripped over that, bounced all the way down the stairs. It was a loud noise. So when everything bumped, so the chest got dropped down the stairs. It made a loud noise. So all the actors jumped because of the loud noise. The one person that was the deaf character didn't respond and react to it. And she said, stop. Or he said, stop, stop, stop. Explained that we're deaf, we can feel it. And we can notice when the hearing people react to the noise. So he let all the hearing people, or he said, you're all hearing, right? You're my service dogs. It means what? You hear a loud noise. So when you jump, look to the closest hearing person, so where they're looking. So when they all jump, then they look. And so it was a little bit delayed. So he explained that, and it brought the point to him. So the deaf person has to look at the hearing person. So when the hearing person looks, so that one specific hearing person will look a little bit early, so that the deaf person can, respond in the right way. So you notice that they notice the environment, but they're not, they're looking around for the cues. So that he gives a lot of the different feedback to the deaf actors. So the lady that was playing the deaf woman, when the other actors were talking, having their dialogue, she would stand there and kind of, stare at. So no, that's not how you do it. Nowadays, it's easy to know. If here people are talking and I don't understand, I'll just go on my phone. I'm not just going to wait for you to get your attention or anything. So I'll just read a book or anything. But in the 1950s, you don't have a phone to look at. But he researched what would they do. So he comes from a deaf family, so the generation. But his mom's deaf, his brothers are deaf, 2 uncles, granduncle, grandaunts. So he's seen a lot of generations, so he knows the varying skills of sign language and styles. So he let the director know, I recommend the woman who's acting as a deaf woman, who's pregnant. perfect thing we do is to knit. Knit hats for the baby, or, just gave them that idea. And they said, no, I don't think we're going to do that. Okay, well, it was a recommendation. I said, whatever. So a couple weeks later, he showed up for tech practice. So he was sitting, the director went straight up to him. He said, guess what? What? Remember you were talking about the knitting? He's like, no, I deleted it. He goes, well, you were right. I'm doing it. He's like, her standing around didn't really make sense. So it all went well. So he did his report for his consultant. So he watched the show and everything, so he went to go watch and checking it out. During the show, he noticed he could see people signing, having conversations within the audience. So he just kind of eavesdropping a little bit. Who's that deaf person? They were trying to figure out who's that deaf actor. And the hearing interpreters and deaf people, they were just. He's like, yes, my job worked. So most of the time, when he's signing an ASL, he'll watch the actors. If they're not naive, or he can identify if they didn't do their studying for the role. The authenticity of it is just, it's gone. You can tell for sure. But when there's like a consultant about it, especially when a hearing person is taking the role as a deaf person, the consultant just, it matches the styles. So if they're deliberating, the second act, the woman, when the woman could actually speak, everyone was just jaw dropped, because having an ASL consultant helped a lot. So once he got involved, it all went all right. It wasn't awkward.
Same like this here, and he's from the dance community, is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I thought, and there's so much physical theater, and the conversation extends to the dance community and to physical theater as well, just to, if you wanted to weigh in on it.
Thank you. I've been dancing for 8 years.
I've been dancing for 8 years.
And I find that it's hard to find dancers to dance with.
I find that it's hard to find dancers to dance with.
I had to do many dancers solo work. I had to play, and I had to treat most work as a solo dancer.
I've created most of my work
And source.
as a source.
No, S-O-L-O. S-O-L-O.
Solo?
Solo, okay.
Yeah.
Solo works, okay.
Yeah.
Solo?
Which is not very fulfilling.
Which is not very fulfilling.
I'd rather have dance with other people than alone.
I'd rather dance with other people than alone.
So I have created a new concept
I've created a new concept
this coming year.
this coming year.
I'll be dancing with puppets.
I will be dancing with puppets.
I have one female puppet at home. She is 4 feet tall, red hair.
I have one puppet at home that's 4.5 feet tall and has what, orange hair?
Yeah. And then ginger. I began dancing at a fun of 30.
Dancing
from therapy, form of therapy,
Form of dancing?
therapy
Therapy
at first.
at first, okay.
I did a show, the last year, I did a show.
Did a show last year
My
about his life.
yeah, called my body was, called my body was,
Called My Body Works.
any questions?
Good, thank you. I'm glad you're here too.
Can I just say one thing too about actors with disabilities is that I'd like to see more actors with disabilities, not just playing characters with disabilities, being characters, peoples, because that's part of it too. We think of it just casting, need a person with CP to play a person, but we could use people in all kinds of roles. I just saw, we were in London last year and saw Macbeth at the Globe, and the woman who played the porter was missing one arm. Didn't really have anything to do with anything. She was magnificent. She played other roles, soldiers and other types of people, but there's no reason why we can't have people with disabilities in roles that the role doesn't necessarily have anything to do with having a disability.
Yeah, absolutely.
I had a chance this summer
Had a chance this summer
to be in a show
to be in a show.
that I played a pirate.
Played a pirate.
Yeah. I had a sword.
A sword.
Yeah. In the show. That was a very different and
Very different and
exciting
exciting.
chance for me to open my eyes to new roles, new opportunities.
It's a very exciting chance for you to open your eyes to new opportunities.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just want to put a challenge that we have. We have about a third of our actors have invisible disabilities. So there'll be advertisements or, like there'll be commercials and things, and they'll call us up, and we have actors that can play, we're looking for actors with disabilities, and then I'll, mention all these different aspects, but no, they want an actor with obviously a visible disability. So that can be kind of challenging too, or we have these huge shows, we have like 50, 45 actors, maybe, and we'll actually sometimes do the shows and we'll get criticized from the disability community because the lead actors don't have disabilities, and I'll say, well, actually they do. So there's always this thing, like we have to feel like we have to prove, like, yes, I have, it's just this ongoing challenge, like.
Jorah's been rejected for stuff. He's an amazing reader. He's read since he was 18 months, so you give him a script and whatever, and he projects to the back of the room, and he's phenomenal. But he doesn't necessarily look obviously disabled, and so it's like, the kid can read, the kid can act, the kid can project, but we can't use him. So imagine that.
I think sometimes it's harder for our actors with invisible disabilities than it is for the actors without, just because they're on both sides, get passed over because, well, you don't look like you have a disability, therefore we can't use you.
Go ahead.
That's one of the challenges I was hearing in the discussion.
Could you speak up a little bit too?
That's one of the challenges I was hearing in the discussion. If you don't want anybody to play a person who, you don't want a hearing play person to play a person who is deaf, but you want to be able to play a deaf person to play a person who can hear. I mean, either everybody can play everything, I mean, it seems to me, everybody should be able to play everything, or, because we get this, of course, racially as well.
Yeah.
You can't play this, but I can play this. You know,
Yeah.
I have an MFA in theater, but I can't play Lady Macbeth, you know. So either everybody can play everything, or, you know, then people can have their, no, you can't play Italian, because you don't know anything about Italians. How can you get on stage and play Italian? So I think there's a challenge there. Do you hear what I'm saying?
I totally hear what you're
There's a
saying.
challenge there.
I totally hear what you're saying, and I think you're right. It is
Yeah.
a challenge, and where do you cross the line? And people became actors to be other people, right? They didn't
Yeah.
become actors to play themselves. They became actors to play other people. If a character has anxiety or depression, do we need to have an actor that has anxiety or depression? Do you know what I'm saying? This is.
Yeah, famous African-American actors right now who cannot get work, just like people with disabilities,
Right.
are very upset that Idris Elba is getting all the work.
Right.
All the British black people are
And
getting
they-
all the work. You see,
Right.
we gotta, either everybody can play everything, because
And
the
maybe
whole idea of acting
maybe that's part
is
of the
that
issue.
we're pretending to be, and we can all pretend to be. We have to be more open. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Because the people who everybody has a reason for why they don't want somebody to do something.
Right.
But if it's all about imaginations and you play dogs, you play cats, you play aliens, we have to be open and say everybody can have the opportunity to play anybody.
Right.
That was all I wanted to say.
Can I speak to that?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
but the issue, I understand what you're saying. I think the issue that is, that qualifies that is the fact that certain people are not, persons with disabilities are not getting cast. That people's imaginations, directors' imaginations have not extended that far, as Lady Macbeth. So what do you do when, and as you said, the same thing with other minorities. So is there an argument to be had that because these people have not been getting as much work, that they should have a priority? They should give priority to people who have been excluded?
I'm sorry, I thought you were
Oh,
asking.
no. I mean, to people who have been excluded from theaters, from professional theater, because they have to make a living too.
Well, directors are going to tell you, as producers will tell you, as the country will tell you, they're trying to put butts in seats, they're trying to make dollars. That's going to be their answer, I'm telling you. That is their answer. That's their answer for discrimination. That's their answer for not hiring older women. We're trying, we've got to have cheesecake because we got to get guys in the theater. So what we need to do is to come up with some sort of answer to this selling tickets thing. Because that becomes the bottom line for theaters, whether they're small, because you have to pay the rent for the space no matter what, you know.
Gadfly has like $1, they have like really good deals now for people with disabilities,
Yeah.
actually. They're making a lot of strides, I have to say.
Right. But the
People
fact
are
that
making strides, but you know, it's such a complex issue. Everybody's strapped, you know. What is theater, 95% unemployment? I mean, it's just a tough, it's a tough gig. So there's no one solution. I do think that from my own experience, when we've done co-productions with, excuse me for saying this, so-called normal theaters or people that are not disabled or whatever. Not typical or whatever. After that, there's a shift because they see that it can be done. They get to know the people. The shows where we have done co-productions, actually our actors with disabilities got better reviews than the non-disabled, for that they were so authentic. There was this like rawness, there was this humanity there that some of the other actors didn't have because they looked like they were acting. So it's been real interesting, and then those directors have then in turn been open to hiring actors with disabilities. So I think like trying to work it in a different angle, because I've been going to these types of, I've been on a lot of panels all over the world, because I travel a lot, and it's basically the same complaints over and over for decades. I think you either, like, we have to think out of the box, either like create co-productions or devise your own theater, like Interact does, create your own theater model where the actors actually have a voice in the process.
I think there is a market for this, and I'll tell you why. Because disability is the norm. We always say, it's abnormal, but the fact of the matter is that there is none of us that will not be touched by disability or who are not touched by disability. I mean, we are all at one point if we are blessed to not die instantly and to live a long and full life, we will on some level become disabled. And this is the human experience, and all of us live with it. And I think audiences want to see themselves and their experiences on stage. Whether it's they have children that have a disability and they want to see an actor like their child. Or they themselves are living with it and want to see someone like them being representative. So I think there is a market for it. I think it is an audience for it, because this is who we are. This is, who we are as a people.
You're preaching to the choir. I think Idris Elba should be able to play African Americans. You're preaching to the choir. She said, why can't we? And I said, because they're going to say ticket price. I didn't say I agree that it should be ticket price.
Right.
So I'm just saying, I'm with the group here. I'm not against the group.
I got that from you too.
I think the smaller, mid-sized theaters, it's easier to get in, in the door than, like with a mixed blood, than like the Guthrie, obviously.
But I also think, too, speaking to that as a small producer, that ticket sales excuse is a joke. Like, I have never had a problem selling tickets because of diversity. What they really mean is they don't want to put money into marketing into new communities and marketing into new areas. That for them to sell tickets to the same rich white people that they always have, that's what they have to do, when they could sell just as many seats to other communities. And I've seen that we operate very, very small. That doesn't mean we don't sell seats. It just, when you're charging low, you fill them up if you know where you're marketing. And I think that is such an excuse that a lot of bigger houses use. And I've seen it in smaller theaters too. I've even been like, oh, well, I don't think that will sell. And I'm like, I don't think you're trying. I don't think you're trying to make it sell. I think you don't actually want it to, so you can prove that you are right.
So when we can overcome that objection, we will create more jobs for more actors. Because whether it's a woman over 50 or it's a man in a wheelchair, or whether it's a British actor trying to get an American role, if we can overcome that objective, because that's the basic objective you get from most casting places, is that, well, they don't want to do that. I did a pitch for doing a sort of Africanized version of Raising in the Sun in Rochester, and I didn't get that job.
In Rochester, I could have told you that.
But, so that I'm just saying, for us as a group, all on the same team here, that is something to think about. What is your comeback? How do you overcome that objection? Because that is the ultimate one to overcome.
I mean, I usually will just tell people how I feel. I don't know if that's the best way, but I usually will tell them, actually, you can sell tickets if you go to this social group that exists for that community, if you go to this other organization that already has this audience that would come to this show. I don't think everyone is afraid to speak out or doesn't speak out. I think it just, people need to hear it. To get new information, to really get things through to people, they have to hear it multiple times, so.
Yeah, for multiple years.
Yeah, often, yes.
Shawn, do you have thoughts?
looking at the theater before 30 years ago, way back when. Oh, back in the Shakespeare time, or when they were doing Shakespeare's play, they were all men. It didn't matter if it was a woman playing it, or if it was a woman character, it was a man playing it. But the woman wanted to act, but they couldn't. So all those years, so it started to expand a little bit. Now that the women got in there, and then there's already been the white group. Finally, people of color joined. So people with disabilities, like just recently they started getting involved into it, or able to be involved into it. So all those years back, and finally they're starting to join in. So that table's pretty crowded, so make some space for me.
Last year, I taught the dance of people at the
Last year you
shot.
shot?
No. S-H-O-C-K.
Shot?
Yeah, the people at the Timberwolves.
Shot people at
Timberwolves.
Timberwolves?
Yeah, because I came for the audition.
You came for the audition?
So then,
That's a good intermission.
yeah, no, and then, yeah. Last 2 years, I came. The last 2 years, I auditioned. This year, they said, this year, they told me, try again next year. We think you've grown as a dancer.
Try again next year, you've grown as a dancer.
Last year, this year, I couldn't go live and video. Last year I did live. Next year I'll be again live. And I'm tired again. I'm determined to be on stage during the games in the next 2 years.
You're determined to be on stage the next 3 years of the Timberwolves games?
Yeah.
I want to know where. Where are you going? I want to know where. How do I find out where you're performing?
That has email.
Email.
Okay. I'll get info from you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Lots to finish.
So now in 2017, the expectations, the deaf should still have accessibility, especially for movies. They have big CDI commercials and stuff like that, and just try to get it out there. But still, they put in a hearing person. What really helps nowadays is social media. That's a huge, big thing for them. They can set up casts through that. There's just a lot of complaints about it. It's just really important for the directors. The directors always say, well, we tried, but we couldn't find anybody. Because there's a huge line of deaf actors. We're all here. Nobody's contacted us. In LA, he has a lot of friends in LA who kind of go through the same thing. The Ghost in the Shell. That's another big one. A lot of people are complaining that they put in that the actor was white. Oh, whitewashing. Yeah. So it's basically just whitewashing it all. So they're pulling actors from other places, and it's just kind of all the same throughout as they go on. So oftentimes deaf roles, the actor that plays it or the token. So they don't go any deeper with them. Everyone has stories and it's all, like everything's just related to their dialogue and there's just no background history to it. So you as a person, no, they see you as a disability. They don't see you as a person that's acting. They just, oh, you're deaf. Oh, so that means you're suffering and you're struggling. It's like, I'm not suffering, I'm not struggling. Like I'm enjoying my life. I'm a strong person. They thought, oh, it was sad. And he's like, I just have love for the deaf. It's his generations, it's his language, it's everything. I'm not sorry for anything at all. He said he loved just watching the theater and watching movies, so maybe he didn't have a lot of impact from the deaf role. But now seeing it on stage and seeing it on movies and just seeing all the negative that comes with it, so it just kind of, his self-image just deflated. So when they cast a deaf actor, when they match a deaf actor, and so now he's as he was a little kid, or so for other little kids, they look up to him, and so that helps, helps the future of it. Before in the 80s, the deaf people didn't know that they could act, and now they won an Emmy. So, or Oscar, sorry. So, but all before that, winning the Oscar and everything, you see an able-bodied person as an actor. The actor with the disability, now they're starting to get awards. Sure. But to make sure if they believe it or not, just because it was the one deaf person out of all of them out there, but oh wow, you made it because you're a deaf person, and that you don't see that every day. But the experiences don't match every day.
I even get that with a lot of the invisible disability and illness too, is people being surprised that, oh, you do so much and you're so sick, and I don't really know another way to be, but I get that comment constantly, like, oh, you must be so strong, and I'm like, I'm really not. I'm not weak, but I'm not really like. So I think that is a thing that regardless of what the disability or even chronic illness is, I think people are just sick of hearing or seeing on stage.
They're really brave. Like,
yeah.
The act, performing.
Yeah.
Oh, they're so brave.
Yeah.
Like
They're
people
just acting. I mean, they're just like any other actor.
I think the thing
Somehow
that
they're brave because they're on the stage.
Yeah. I think the thing that in life that has hurt my feelings the most that didn't come from like someone close to me was the first time someone was ever like, oh wow, you get so much done. And I was like, I do a regular amount of things. What?
Right. You get that as a parent too, that,
Yeah.
and I actually tied that into autistic license, but the idea that I'm some kind of saint because I love my son. And that I care for him, and how hurtful that is, because I think I'm very proud of him and I love him and he's mine. But the other piece of it too is that it renders me invisible, because it's still a challenge, and I'm still tired, and I still worry, and I'm still very flawed, and I screw up, and I lose my temper. And if you see me as some kind of saint or God giving special children to special parents, then you don't see me. And it is also a way of telling yourself this can't happen to you, because I don't have what she has, and I don't have anything unique or special. And there are parents who have disabilities, who have children with disabilities. So there is no type of person that has a child with a disability. Could happen to any one of us at any moment. It just takes one tragic bike accident for any parent to become a parent of a child with a disability. So, yeah, those types of things are they're insulting, they're frustrating, they make you invisible, they make you, yeah.
When they feed back to that larger thing we were talking about of people with disabilities not getting cast in things, because everyone thinks, you know, I did talk about how there are energy issues and there are concerns about how much you can do, but those accommodations are so easy to make, and I think they're certainly worth it, especially if the alternative message is that people with disabilities can't do those things, which is really not true at all.
Can you talk us some more about some of the accommodations?
I mean, really the main things I do that have worked super well are just making extra rehearsals time. That I make sure that rehearsal spaces, as well as, so everyone always worries about the accessibility of the performance venue, but rehearsal space when you're a small company is probably not where you're gonna be, so that's a big one, making sure that that's accessible. We got lucky this time because we're mostly using the Minneapolis Central Library, which is fine for everyone, so. That's really the main thing that we do, but I think it is so valuable, and it says like, hey, I know you can do this show. If you need some extra time, we have it, so don't feel like this 15 to 20 hour a week has to be super stressful for you. And I also have PTSD, and so we also work with a lot of people who have various mental illnesses too, and I think they actually end up using that time built in much more than people with physical disabilities most of the time.
I think some of what you were alluding to is in show selection for companies.
Oh,
and
yeah.
To being then careful to not perhaps select shows where it's about overcoming and, you know, being put up
Yeah.
on a pedestal and, you know, kind of running into the problems of that.
I'm used to avoiding those scripts because I hate them in queer narrative, where like you have to somehow overcome your queerness to become more queer and happy later. It doesn't make any sense to me, but there's a million of them. And so it like was nothing for me to also be like, oh yeah, I should obviously skip this for other marginalized people too. Like, if that's not authentic to my narrative, it's not going to be authentic to a lot of other people's.
For me, I have to do lots of work, getting my words down in writing ahead.
For me, I have to do a lot of work getting my words down in writing ahead of time.
So the cast knows my ideas.
So the cast knows your ideas. And you email a lot. That helps. To make that accommodation for them?
Yeah.
Easier to have it in writing?
Yeah.
Sure.
Script for a show? Put your ideas out there.
Do others have thoughts to share in general or any questions that you would like to ask?
Yeah, so I'm Manny Elliott. I'm actually Cassandra's business partner at Gadfly. And so we talked a lot tonight about, you know, what roles should go to which people and who gets to say that and everything. And I think a lot of it, just one thing that I'm noticing is that it's who gets invited to the table and how do we build that into the structures of our company. And this is on the forefront of my mind lately because we're actually rebuilding our board of directors. And so I guess...
So if anyone wants to be on a board.
Yes.
Come
subtle
see
plug
me
for
after
that.
this.
But so I guess for the panel, what resources are there for people looking to kind of, and I hate this term, but like diversify their board, or how do we reach those community, and like, do you know anyone that can like serve on the board, because I feel like inviting people into the decision-making process as opposed to like Shawn said, just hiring like the interpreters or just hiring the consultants. It goes much deeper than that. I think it's like, how do we bring those people into the decision-making processes?
Well, except boards don't decide on casting.
no.
So, you know, you don't want you to get your board.
No,
Yes.
no.
To be in the show.
As we talked about
But, you know,
Still
I think
general
it's the leader,
inclusiveness.
working with the leadership structure and, I don't know, that, yeah, I mean, yeah, we
Yeah.
should all have diverse boards, as we know, it's very
John
different.
has a good the Big
John?
Special Arts.
Yeah,
It's a
John
good
has a
place
lot of
to-
good tips for board members, probably.
But I think a lot of the people that have been serving on access advisory committees get hit all the time.
Yeah.
Okay, here's a
Yeah.
person who's blind, who's a really good communicator. She'll get asked 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 or 12 times to be on a board. She has energy for
Yeah,
one.
that is
Yeah.
an issue, as we know, in that with
Yeah.
African Americans,
Well,
or
it's
people
like
that want to
the
serve on
same
board
getting asked.
Well, and
are
I
like
think
on what,
yeah.
10 boards, on 10 boards, because everybody,
Well,
it's-
yeah.
Shawn was saying he's on many boards.
yeah, right,
Well,
yeah.
and we're running into kind of a unique problem, which is that we want the board to represent, I don't want to toot my own horn, but we actually built the audience in the group of artists that we regularly work with that we want, which is lots of POC, it is some people with disabilities, it is almost exclusively queer, or at least so feminist that they feel a lot of overlap with that community. And we are having the opposite problem of I think where a lot of boards are coming from and wanting to diversify, which is that we just want our board to reflect the audience and artists we're already serving. And it is frustrating feeling like we're competing with people who like only want to look diverse and aren't really building that into the foundations of what they're doing.
Other questions or thoughts to share?
Shawn's got a
Yeah.
comment. So he's involved, it's 20% theater. He was supposed to go there tonight because he's part of their accessibility committee. But he sent his vlog in, so they go ahead and did the meeting without him using his vlogs. So the 20% theater, they have their board. One of the board members, he's queer. They're strong, queer, transgender group. So he's queer, but they're going through interpreting school. So they got an idea to create an accessibility committee. So there's the committee, and then there's the accessibility committee as a branch of that. So it's people who just love theater that have disabilities or that are deaf. And so now they're all discussing what they can do to improve the accessibility for the audience. On top of that, they're 20%. Okay, so the 20% group is applying for a grant that they get every year that they can provide to deaf interpreters. Well, a separate. So it's going to be a separate account for the CDIs, Certified Deaf Interpreters. Before that, in the Twin Cities, they never had a deaf interpreter. It was always an ASL interpreter. So let me clarify. A certified deaf interpreter is actually an interpreter who is deaf, like him. So an ASL interpreter, yes, he does sign in the ASL, but it's a new concept for the Twin Cities area. But how we finance that, they got a grant. So they paid for the full team. It tends to be 1 or 2 ASL interpreters. So now it's 2. So a total of 4 interpreters. 2 teams of 2. So 2 hearing, 2 deaf. The hearing interpreter listens, signs it, and the deaf interpreters memorize the script or has the script. And then so they work at the same pace, so that they can follow what's actually going on. So he's watched the play 10 times or read the script more than 10 times. So he knows what their body language is going to be like. So the first time at the Guthrie, they had a deaf interpreter last June. Refugee. It was the first time they had a deaf actor. So the interpreter was an actor before she became an interpreter. And then she went in the interpreting program and was very skilled in her acting. And watching her, just the person saw her and just got huge goosebumps right when the dialogue started. And so this was very different. So if you don't know sign, it's kind of hard to see kind of what's going on. So the analogy, the black and white TV versus the HD TV. So that gives you the big picture. So it just kind of, it brings that accessibility up to the people around. You know, if you have just the two hearing interpreters, it's not quite the same experience. Because it tends to not be their first language. Plus 2 people signing for the whole thing versus how many 8, 9, 10 people on stage at one time. Plus you're watching, and so you're missing what's going on. So that's a challenge. It's a really complicated process. So they are setting up the accessibility committee to try to figure that out for the theaters. On top of their goal but that's their goal of the 20% theater, to really support the LGBT too. You know, just anything. That's what their big support is, the LGBT and the deaf community for interpreters. So, I mean, for the deaf people, they come from all different countries and stuff, but the signing is what they need for. Because being deaf people in the audience isn't a problem. Yeah, deaf people are not just one thing. We're every race, and we all have different interests, so we're all different. But just having, it's just important to find us.
Jeanne, I was curious about like your show selection as far as Interact specifically, and then also when people come to bring your performers out into the more mainstream theaters, kind of like how do you watch out for them too? I guess it's a couple different questions, but
well, we create our own work. Okay. It's devised, and we usually, we'll have a big idea, and then we start, like brainstorming with the company and then distilling it. And sometimes we work with the playwright. Now we're working on a big show with Kevin, but it's still very collaborative. Kevin playing, so we're still 95% of the information is we create through improv with our company. So we come up with the ideas for the show a few years ahead, because of course you have to write the grants, and so we have creative brainstorming. And it's about what issues are happening in society, sometimes just passions, or some of the shows we did actually come from the stories of our performers. I just give an example. We went to England. We performed at a festival in England, and our group is very mixed with all disabilities and without disabilities. And we were treated, it was a disability festival about, interestingly enough, bias and discrimination. And we performed, and I noticed Kevin would always get invited out to the pub with the British actors with disabilities, and none of our group would ever get invited. We were always like, what's with this? Kevin would go out, and he was having a great time, and we're like sitting there, what are we? We came all the way to England, nobody won. And when I'm like, what's going on? He said, well, I have to tell you that they really don't approve of our company because we mix all the disabilities together, and that's just not done here. And the fact that we have non-disabled people in the cast is just like a no-no. So we were like really discriminated against. We felt terrible, and we actually did a show about that based on a friend of mine who wrote a book called The Worldwide Church of the Handicapped. And it was actually about all the different disability groups kind of discriminating, against each other.
Sorry, as an interpreter, I missed the beginning.
The
What
play.
you just said.
Oh, the play part. There was actually a book written by a friend of mine called The Worldwide Church of the Handicapped. It was about all these different groups of people with disabilities, kind of their resentments. But it sounds depressing, but it was actually very powerful. And this person, this kind of shaman character who happened to be like a dwarf with leprosy, came and created the Worldwide Church of the Handicapped with all these different. But it was really about the discrimination that we had experienced when we were performing before this audience, because we mixed people up, and it was kind of like the class system there. It was like people, they have theaters for people, companies of people in wheelchairs, they have theater companies for people that are deaf, there are theater companies for people with developmental disabilities. They're all like separate, and you do not want to mix it up. So we created a show about that. So we did before Trump was elected, we did a satire called Hell is Empty and All the Devils Are Here, which was a satire which unfortunately a lot of the things that were in the show ended up coming true. But so that's how we come up with the shows. It's very organic. It's very, sometimes, it's, you had another question in there, but I can't remember what it was.
As far as when people come to you and, look to place one of your artists into their company for, whatever kind of disability they may have, or, if they're looking for a certain person.
Well, we've never had like just people wanting to do with one of our, usually we've had Theater La Di Da has worked with twice, we've done a co-production, and then they worked with some of our actors with disabilities. We would usually have one of our staff, like who are, by the way, all of our acting, our theater staff are all practicing artists and actors. So then they would usually be with those actors if those actors needed some support. Or sometimes they want me, like when Ron did the show, this was 20 years ago when we did this, but he wanted me to be there just like to help him a little bit with some of the, issues that might arise or something. But it was never really that difficult. It was just small, easy, just being very flexible, right? Just like if you go somewhere and work with another culture, like when I went to Africa and worked with pygmies in the rainforest. I mean, you make some accommodations because they're speaking a tribal language and you're speaking a language and there are 3 interpreters and you're miming a lot, and I can't tell them exactly what I'm thinking, so I jump on and show that. I mean, you're just flexible, right? So the thing that Stacey was mentioning about appropriate audience behavior, that is so cultural. That is like, I'm from Louisiana. We did a tour down there. Our audience was like, we were in New Orleans. Our audience was like 80% African American. There was commentary throughout that whole show, and we loved it, and we wouldn't do that in Minnesota, but in different cultures, in North Africa, we performed there, people talk to the actors, and it's just a cultural differences. You just have to be very flexible and open, and not too rigid in the way this is the way theater is done and has to be done, and
Yeah, that's something that we've talked about in some of our other conversations as well. I had said that even for me, being able to go to the opera and tweet during the show has gotten me to go to the opera. Yeah, so it is just kind of about, changing the way that you look at things and being open to those. I definitely agree. So, well, I think it's 8:30, so usually we kind of wrap up around now and give you some time to have your Minnesota goodbye. But I was wondering if you could all maybe say what, like where we could see your work next, if you have something coming up or anything you might recommend.
Do we want to start down here?
Yeah.
Sure. Right now he's working on a play with the director for about a year now. It should be advertised the first 2 weeks of this coming up June 2018. Now they're developing the script and finding actors. Maybe the mixed blood theater working. So two out of the 4 are deaf. The other 2 are hearing. But they have an interpreting background. Interpreting with a theater background. So all 4 of them can sign proficiently. This is the first time that they all could actually communicate with each other as a cast. So there's one director needed an interpreter. They didn't need an interpreter. Oh, for the cues, to let them know. So the other actor didn't know signs. So when you see that sign, then you can start talking. So now they just hand off information that way. But the name's not finalized. Think about Welcome to Hell, but so he doesn't know what the final name is as of today. Oh, domestic violence. It's going to relate with domestic violence. So it's hands-on theater. So right there, experience, and not about like the physical abuse, but like the relationship. Like, discriminating against them and make them feel belittled.
We have a fundraising event coming up, I think next week. I'm going to try not to be scared about that for a minute. And then it is our really fun event that we do about 3 times a year. It is called Drunk Queer History. It's very loosely based on the TV show Drunk History. Our storyteller is going to be Lisa Marie Brimmer, who, if you know her at all, is absolutely Lisa Marie Brimmer, who is absolutely fantastic. And then we'll have 2 improvisers, and when she sort of sloppily tells the story, they'll pick some words and do something. It's rarely based on queer history, the way the story is. And that's next Tuesday, so the 26th. And then we have a full-blown show, play, Crown of the Holly Queen by local playwright Eli Effinger Weintraub. Some of you might know them. They are amazing.
The name of that. Sorry.
Yes, of course. Crown of the Holly Queen by Eli Effinger Weintraub.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know the letters. That looked right. And that is sort of a queer feminist retelling of the pagan Holly King and Oak King myths. There's also a love story in that. There's some other really fun stuff going on. It's also sort of a retelling of Camelot. You should come. It's going to be December 1st through 10th at the Crane Studios new studio space. You can also, if you're not going to remember any of that, you can just follow Gadfly Theater Productions on Facebook. I'm sure we will be sort of blitzing that over the next few months / next week for Drunk Queer History.
I don't have anything particular to plug. I wrote the play and I work. Jordy is active in a wonderful program called Partnership Resources that does musicals and other theater. They're not in the works of anything at the moment. If they were, I would definitely be plugging it. Much to worry about Medicaid being possibly cut because that program will go away. So please contact your senators and people today. I will plug my husband's show, that he'll be doing in October, I believe, here at the Park Square of Mice and Men. So it's relevant, and he's done that for many years, and he plays George. It's for educational programming, but they are going to be adding some evening performances, my understanding. And what Michael brings to the character of George is wholly different as a father of a adult son with a developmental disability. It's really something to behold. So if you get a chance to see that, I recommend it. So that's my plug.
There's 4 weeks of public performances.
What's that?
There's 4 weeks of public shows.
Okay, that's awesome. You can go during the day, any matinee, right? And you guys are going to do some evening too?
Yeah.
Yep.
Calendars are
We're doing a show that opens, it's called Feast of Fools, and it's a medieval fantasy kind of satire. It's hard to, Kevin Kling is in it, and it's based on a real festival that was a huge thing in Europe for many, many years, for like a couple centuries at least, where for one day during the Feast of Fools, the people at the bottom of society could be king, and the king had to bow to them, and that's the gist of it. And if you get the city pages, we have a whole ad. We actually brought a full-page ad in the fall city pages, arts, and then so it has the schedule, but it opens on the November 11th, and we're gonna have a medieval feast fundraiser, and then it closes on, I think, December 9th at the Lab Theater with 50 cast of 50.
Great, and then since we're at Park Square and they're generously donating their space to us tonight, you can see there's billboard, or I don't know, posters in the back there, but they've got Henry and Alice Into the Wild that just opened. Looks like they do have a bargain night tomorrow for 99 cents, first come, first serve, so for accessibility purposes.
So what is that?
Henry and Alice Into the Wild. And then October 13th, they open Hamlet too. And then there were just a couple more things that I wanted to talk about. There's another group called Fair Play Minnesota. They have a conversation, I think kind of similar about women in theater to what we did last month. It's going to be this Sunday from 2 to 4. That's going to be at SoCana in Minneapolis. For those who are RSVP'd on Facebook even, I posted about it in there. And then our next conversation is going to be October 30th, and that's going to be about LGBTQIA inclusion. We have panelists already. Hector Chavarria, I think is how you pronounce it, will be on the panel. And then Claire from 20%. And then also Michelle Obama so far is on the panel. So we hope you all come to us for that. We'll put another event on Facebook, and I guess that location is probably to be determined at this point in time. We'll keep an eye out.
I have.
No, go ahead.
I have dance. Cabaret.
Dance cabaret. February.
Patrick's Cabaret?
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
November 18th and 19th is Artists with Disabilities performing in Patrick's Cabaret at the World NGF Theater.
I'll be in that town. I'll be in that town.
You'll be there?
Yeah. I'll be dancing.
You'll be dancing?
Yeah.
Great.
Company, please.
Come see him, yes. Well, thank you everyone for attending, and thank you to the panelists for donating your time.